Okay, let's get started. Good morning, good afternoon, possibly good evening, and thanks for joining us today. My name is Jason Larson, and I'm the head of content here at the International Institute for Analytics, and I'm your host for today's session. And welcome to today's webinar called High Precision Forecasting, Reducing Errors and Gaining Market Insights. In case you are new to the International Institute for Analytics, or IIA, as we typically call ourselves, we are an independent, strategic, outcome-focused data and analytics advisory firm. We're practitioners working with practitioners. Analytics is all we do, and we do it with a relentless focus on measurable impact. We believe that people drive change, not data, and we nurture high-touch client interactions to provide customized solutions to achieve critical priorities. Visit our homepage for more information about who we are and how we support data and analytics organizations and enterprises in making the difficult and necessary transition to advanced analytics and AI. Okay, before we dive into the presentation, let's go over a few housekeeping items. First, we are excited to announce our next webinar on April 24th with Ryan Sousa, who is the former CDAO at Seattle Children's Hospital, and who is also an expert in our exclusive network for one-on-one client guidance. Sousa will explore the virtuous learning cycle of data fluency, a framework that transcends mere data literacy to foster continuous growth and innovation across the enterprise. This webinar is specifically designed for organizations that recognize the critical role of data, but seek to evolve beyond isolated use cases and basic infrastructures. Regarding today's session, we encourage you to submit questions or comments via the chat window, and we'll make sure to save time at the end of the session to address as many questions as possible. Both Jason and Steve really want this to be a conversation, a dialogue, so please have the questions flowing in, and we will address them. A recorded version of this webinar will be available and email it out after the presentation. All right, so without further ado, we are delighted to welcome Jason Harper and Steve Bartos as our featured speakers today. Jason is the founder and president of ReadySignal. He's a seasoned data science leader with over 2 decades of experience in analytics, machine learning, and AI. And Steve is a senior director of corporate data and analytics at the Worthington Steel Company. In this role, he's responsible for driving impactful analytics across the enterprise. So, this session is pretty neat for us. We know that Steve and his team have really struck up a great partnership with ReadySignal. And likewise, IIA goes way back with Steve and Worthington. And we've enjoyed about an 8-year partnership with Worthington Steel, part of the organization formerly known as Worthington Industries. We've had the privilege of collaborating with over, I think, about 15 analytics leaders at Worthington Steel, closely observing their evolution as they achieve significant milestones in over 120 projects and initiatives, tackling numerous challenges along the way. And notably, since 2023, we've supported over 50 initiatives, including the strategic split into 2 highly successful entities. So a lot of great hard work there. So like ReadySignal, we're immensely proud to support many leaders whose organizations reflect Worthington Steel's commitment to growth and excellence. Today's session is about integrating external data to improve forecasting precision and how to navigate that adoption. And IIA believes that a solid data strategy, which includes integrating external data, is the bedrock of analytic success. And this strategy must be oriented around demand, around the business. And this is a key theme that I hope everyone takes away from the session. We invite you to check out our resource hub on data strategy, where you can find our perspective, practical guidance, and tools that complement today's session. All right, so now let's turn it over to the stars of the show, Jason and Steve. And gentlemen, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Much appreciated. Let me see if I can successfully share my screen. Bring us back to here. I'm assuming we're good.
All right, we are good.
Lovely. Well, so thanks. So as you said, really appreciate the partnership. IA has been a great partner for us in Worthington. Steve, thank you guys so much for being part of today. I think we actually met Worthington through IIA. So again, really appreciate that. Today, we really want to make sure that we walk away with some practical applications of what we're talking about. And so, as you said, we're gonna cover like how to integrate external data and improve forecasting precision. We're gonna talk about some of the forecasting errors and the cost of the forecasting errors. Then we'll mix in some real world use cases and try to help give someone again those real practical examples. So that we're just going to dive in. So my background, I'm an economist, so I do have somehow 25-ish years experience now, which sounds weird to say, but here I am. So we're going to talk about how really the future that we see in this space isn't just about doing better math and better data science, but it's really about integrating the right inputs and having good, clean data that we can really rely on and trust to help us get into those predictions and things that we can actually take action on. Um, so we've kind of talked about this, but we're going to talk a little bit about some of the traditional struggles that we've had, and then transition that into some of the things that we can do to carry forward and make better forecasts, better business decisions. Because ultimately, the outcome here of what all of this work is, are we making better decisions? That's the goal. So it's not just about having better models, better data, better things. It's actually like taking action and doing things differently and achieving the results that we need to hit. So um kind of setting the stage here. So when we're thinking about our models, using mostly internal data to forecast the business is really like trying to stay dry in the rain by adjusting your raincoat, but you're standing in a puddle, right? So the raincoat's important. That's like your sales and inventory data. It's important, but the puddle, this external environment, is these macroeconomic shifts, demographic changes, consumer sentiment. If you ignore those, no amount of internal fine tuning is going to keep you dry, right? Or prepared. So I mean, can we think of any recent external factors that may be impacting business? Uh, Anyone remember the Trump tariffs from last week? Obviously, someone sent me this chart over the weekend. Yeah, things are weird and crazy, and they're actually different than the last time too. So it's being able to figure out how we anticipate these things, right? It's obviously this is an extreme example. And we're not saying that you could actually have predicted the exact content or timing of the tariffs. I mean, these are political decisions, they're external, episodic, and inherently hard to forecast. But what you can do is plan for volatility, right? So you're not just responding to it. You can run scenarios where key inputs jump 10 to 20% in cost and look at the impact of that and look at decisions you could make. You can identify signals like trade flows, commodity trends that indicate a tightening before the news hits. And you can hedge, stock ahead, shift procurement if your models are sensitive to these scenarios, right? So in that sense, the goal isn't to perfectly predict the tariff, it's to be less surprised by it. So, things that you can do right now, right? So you can look at, we can look at pre-purchasing things. So if you have exposed inputs that are, going to be impacted by volatility, spikes, you can actually pre-purchase, right? You can actually look at reprioritizing suppliers based on logistics risk, things like that. You can figure out like, who are my suppliers that are going to be facing the biggest challenges, and order them and be prepared to have backups for them, things like that. You can also adjust forecasts using these leading indicators, right? So you want to figure out, instead of waiting to see a drop in demand, we can look at those leading indicators that are actually driving those drops in demand ahead of time, because policy shifts like the tariffs, they don't show up first in your ERP. They're going to show up in shipping lanes, commodity markets, sentiment first. So with that, I'm going to dive into, I have a few of these next slides set up like this, where we can help figure out, this is a prompt that I'm suggesting you can take and drop into ChatGPT to try to figure out what you can do on your own. So what we're doing here is we've created context to set up what you're looking for. We've created a role that is how we want ChatGPT to play, and then some interview questions to help figure out what are the specific things that maybe could be impacting your business. And this framework, I'll just give a quick plug to my friend Jeff Woods. He wrote the AI Driven Leader. This CRIT framework actually changes how you can interact with ChatGPT, for example, to help give really tailored results. And so if these prompts are helpful, you can email me or Jason and we can send them to you. And so I think I got like 3 of these in here to help kind of take these little deep dives. And I think with the CRIT framework for prompting, I'll just note that it's like super powerful. And one of the things, really, if there's one thing you take away from this presentation, it's this CRIT along these frameworks. So if there's really only one thing that you take away, well, it should be that you should use external data in business planning and forecasting. But if there's two things, it would be the CRIT framework alongside that. So that said, back to the topic. So we want to talk about the nature of uncertainty in forecasting. So we want to think about when we have to revise forecasts, like what does that mean? What's the process for that? And what happens when, when we get things wrong, there's consequences, right? And so we want to make sure that when we are building our forecasts, we want to ensure that that we can trust them, right? And the way that we build trust is by having accurate forecasts over a period of time that we're able to actually make and take decisions on repeatedly and feel confident in that. And when we do that, that allows us to shift to being very proactive, right? That's the goal, is being able to get ahead of these decisions versus chasing after what's already happened, right? So this signal-driven forecasting enables us to see what's coming and not just explain what's already occurred. A lot of models focus on explaining what's occurred, but we want to make sure that we're, again, looking forward, making decisions, and taking that in. And so just one quick slide to kind of set our expectations around, or set our framework around the costs of getting it wrong. So obviously, we can have revenue loss, right? So if we're under forecasting, we're missing sales, we're losing customers. Over forecasting, we're going to have excessive stock, so we're actually going to waste money on inventory, and that inventory can actually go bad and just generally lose it. So we're losing margin and customer experience. So these costs are very significant. For investor confidence, right? So for those of us that have investors, making sure that we're actually hitting our earnings numbers, and making sure that when we are going to come up short, we know that ahead of time, so we can start to have those conversations, and really having consistent, high quality, earnings, investor communications support, supply chain bottlenecks, right? So making sure that we've got forecasting around our inventory management, making sure that we're not having inventory spikes or factory idle time, things like that. And then generally marketing and efficiencies. So making sure that, I've done a lot of work, and I'm going to walk through an example here at the marketing side of the world, where we've misinvested. Either we've overinvested in a campaign or underinvested in a campaign. Either case leads to very costly reductions in return on investment and return on our ad spend. So getting all of these things right is critical to making sure that we avoid these costs. So even the best forecasting models can break down. So not because they're wrong, but because the world around them is changing faster than they can update. So when we think about what resilient forecasters do differently, so first, they integrate external signals. So inflation, tariffs, commodity prices, climate, those aren't noise, they're context, right? So if your model doesn't ingest these internal shifts, it's really flying blind. Second, they update models dynamically. So not unlike a quarterly cadence, but as soon as new data suggests that the assumptions have shifted, that's how you stay ahead instead of playing catch up. Third, they stress test scenarios, not because they expect to nail the forecast, but because they want to understand the range of impact. So what happens if steel jumps 15%? What happens if freight times double? Scenario thinking isn't pessimistic, it's being prepared. And lastly, they collaborate across teams. So data science working with supply chain, finance, they're all working with different data. And the teams that win are the ones that bring those signals together and turn them into a shared understanding of what's coming next. So forecasting isn't necessarily, the dirty little secret here, forecasting isn't necessarily about precision, it's about adaptability. And this is how you build it. So you can't control the market, but you can anticipate it. So it's about understanding in the right way, it can create significant competitive advantages. So steel demand can swing overnight due to tariff policy, geopolitical events, material prices. You can't stop it, but you can see the impacts coming. So with that, I'm going to dive into a little example of a marketing example. So back in the day, I ran analytics for Organic. It's an Omnicom agency. And one of the reasons I actually founded Ready Signal was from the work that we did helping Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep. So we were the agency of record for them. And I was studying the relationship between online consumer behaviors and car sales. And so what I found was uh, what we discovered was that roughly 30% of vehicle sales could be explained by pricing and marketing actions. Nearly 70% of vehicle sales were driven by the outside market conditions. And I found that fascinating. So just how little control the marketer had to really change outcomes. 70% was coming from outside. So the importance of understanding what made up that 70% and controlling for that in our models was critical. Otherwise, if you don't do that, you're assigning that value to things within marketing and advertising. You're saying you're looking at those relationships and thinking they're a lot more powerful than they are. So what happens then, you're surprised when, hey, you spend more and then you didn't sell more, right? Like you're in effect trying to push that string. You're not getting back what you expected. This may sound familiar to some folks. So my team actually found, when we looked into that 70%, we actually found that there were 30 external factors that we could look at. So once we were able to control for those in our forecast, we were able to get significant like sensitivity on those marketing levers that we had to pull. So we got very confident in, okay, if we, how much are we spending? Where are we spending it? What are we spending it on? And what do we expect to get then from this system of advertising expenditures, right? And so what we were able to do, really trust these insights, really trust the findings here. So that let us, once we launched, that let us actually make decisions. So once we launched, so this was, we were working on the launch of a Ram truck. This was, a few years ago now. But once we launched, we could see that certain indicators, certain consumer digital behaviors weren't hitting levels that we expected, actually lower. So we had very specific KPIs. We knew if we had these numbers, we would sell through the number of vehicles we wanted to achieve. And we weren't getting that. We weren't getting that right away. And so this campaign actually launched just before kind of streaming was the mainstay. So this was mainly just a standard television digital campaign. And so what we were able to do, we actually, because of this data and because of the trust that we had in our forecast, we were able to change the TV ads that we were running just a few days into the campaign. So we were making changes to, it was like $120 million launch budget. We were making these changes on the fly. And this was back, like I said, before streaming was a thing. So making these types of changes while the campaign's running was really unheard of. You typically launch, set it, see what happens, maybe do some minor things. We actually changed the TV creative. And this at the time, it was a little expensive. However, the executive team, the team at Chrysler, I think it was Bob Nardelli may have been CEO at the time of the group, but everyone believed in this so much that we did it. And this was seen as very innovative. And what we found was once we took these actions, because of the belief in the forecast, we were actually able to, see it improve, right? And so we made these changes and we changed the ads, the types of ads, and we could see this digital footprint improved. And then what happened was we were able to hit our metrics, right? And so what we found was, it comes down to that confidence, right, in the models to be able to make these decisions. And like Wall Street Journal picked this up. This became a big thing. As I said, this is actually why we have Ready Signal today was having that confidence and seeing what that can do and believing the models making the decisions, right? And so for us, it's taking the steps here are taking that information, the external data, the internal data, bringing it together, and then actually taking that that next step of the human part, saying, here's what we're seeing, here's what we're going to do, and having that level of confidence in what you're doing to make these decisions, so much that folks like myself and a few others are willing to bet their career on it, where the stakes are really high, but that's actually where we're at and able to make these decisions. So that's sort of the high level story. A little bit more for those curious, one of the ways that we did this, so this is a little bit on the technical side, but so we took those 30 signals, right? And then things like weather, commodities, employment, macroeconomic things. And then, so instead of overfitting a model, we actually used what's called the principal component analysis, compressed it down, and then we simplified it into some composite steps. And then that let us actually get into very powerful models. And so for the second one of these, if you want to learn a little bit more about how to do exactly what I just described there, I've written this prompt that would help you figure out how to do this in your business. So if this is helpful, you can copy and paste this, Jason, or I can send it to you as well. But this will help kind of guide you through incorporating external data using a principal component analysis. All right, so so how to get started. So in addition to going through that technical PCA route, one of the key steps to this whole thing, there's no shortage of all this data that we're talking about. So it's everywhere. There's so much of it. I mean, the dirty little secret of today is you really don't need more data. We have enough data. It's finding the right data, right? So figuring out what is the right data that we can use to help create this more confident, more precise forecast and contextualize the market factors that will help us actually drive and explain our model. So the way that, most this is how Ready Signal, this is sort of like our thinking here, right? So most teams talk about external data, they grab what's convenient, they get overwhelmed trying to boil the ocean, right? Because either it's here's what's simple and I can get, or I'm just gonna try to get everything. And so the way we approach this is we've tried to create this kind of repeatable, streamlined process that kind of helps cut through some of that noise. And step one, we've built a curated catalog, right? So as our team's coming up with new data, we've got tens of thousands of normalized signals. We bring it together, put it in a catalog that we can then pull from, right? So our team, every time we're going out to get new data, they don't have to go and reinvent the wheel. And then step two, we run a testing plan. So for your teams that are using this testing plan structure, it's, first looking at the correlations and finding the things that are related, and then testing lag. So finding out which of your signals could be a leading indicator. And then lastly, transform them into getting the model ready. And then that step three is using that PCA analysis that I just spoke about. There's several ways to do this. This way I find to be the most explainable, because again, we're trying to build confidence, right? And so a key theme to this is being able to explain what your model is doing and why to the business decision makers. Because oftentimes we have executives that are making decisions and they need to trust the source of their decision making, right? And so that's really our focus, is enabling them, the decision makers, to understand the process. And so that's why we choose a lot of the steps that we do. And then that final step, putting this together in a model and then providing it into some format that's an actionable forecast, right? So we're translating this kind of interesting data into an actionable forecast that includes the why. And so what we see is the results are pretty clear. So, on the left, you see a traditional kind of, baseline forecast that's mostly built on internal data. And while it generally follows the shape, you'll find times where it misses key turning points. You'll see some critical divergence between what you expected and what actually happened. Right. And oftentimes that's just obviously and clearly part of, some external event, right? Or things that could have been predicted that are just outside of the business. So on the right, this is the same data, same model, plus the external data. So we've added in things like some commodity pricing, some macroeconomic trends, and the result. So the forecast not only tracks closer to reality, but anticipates some of those directional changes earlier. So in this age of algorithms, it's not about better algorithms, better math. It's really about the simple concept of just more context. So making sure you're finding the signals that matter most today. So with that, here's the third, and I believe final, prompt. So everything I just described, you can take this prompt and drop it into ChatGPT, and it will kind of walk you through that process for your business, right? And so the critical step here is this interview step that's going to kind of tailor very specifically how to do this in your business. And so this is something that if you have a data scientist on your team or analysts that are trying to get into this space or maybe take it up a bit, this should really help with the process. And of course, if you get stuck, they can feel free to reach out to me. Like I'd be happy to just to help shepherd along any way I can, especially if you're going down the DIY route for something like this. Like just please consider myself a resource that all y'all have access to. So with that, I feel like I have fire hosed enough information for the moment. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Steve, and he's going to give us a little bit of perspective on the techniques and challenges that Worthington Steel has gone through. So Steve, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me. Glad to be here. Just to add some context around. So again, Steve Bartos, head of the corporate data and analytics team with the Worthington Steel Company. We have as a factor that we do a lot of work in the automotive space. We have had a forecasting model around the automotive portion of our business for a long time. That model, as part of it, has an absolute wealth of external data baked into some of the proprietary auto vehicle build projections that we leverage. Since I arrived at Worthington Steel 10 years ago, we've been seeking ways to do similar with other areas of our business, whether that's product lines, whether that's our business at whole, anything we can do to incorporate external data into our business impactfully. This has been off and on a focus of the work we do. One of the examples of recent that helped drive us to our partnership with Ready Signal had to do with, and it's a conversation I'm assuming that most of you have, almost all of you have, which is the overview of the current economic conditions in general and as they relate to your business. Folks talk about new housing starts or whatever those factors are that conventional wisdom would say and a wealth of experience of your business partners would say, this stuff matters. So whether it's at a quarterly business review, at monthly S&OP meetings, folks talk about that external data, and they do that at Worthington Industries prior to the separation as well. Where this took a fantastic and valuable turn for us was we were asked to build the central repository. Think of all these teams, all these leaders. What are all the data that they want to see and all the insights they want to see in a one-stop shop? The conversation that ensued was extremely valuable, which was, and the question we asked, well, do we know which ones matter, how they matter, when they matter, and how they're impacting our business? So if you flip to the next slide, please. And it's an excellent conversation. So we started, and again, to the forecast literacy, to the data literacy, most folks understand in general what the forecast is, but how well do they understand the nuances of the forecast, how it's generated, the confidence intervals around it? And as you have conversations about impactful external data, what we were looking for, and it's similar to what Jason was talking about, what of all those accepted within your business external data sources actually matter, and when do they matter? And can you scientifically and mathematically determine when they matter? So we took a certain product family and did just that. Talk to all the folks in the business and start with that. Again, as Jason mentioned, it's difficult because all you have is what folks reference to. You need to go out and get that information. You need to play the math game. When do they matter? How do they matter? What lead, what lag, etc. But in the end, what you end up with is deeper conversations around folks' confidence in the reading, writing, critically consuming data and information. That's that forecast literacy. Do we all understand what the forecast is, how it's generated, what it is, what it isn't? And then as you bring in external data, there's such valuable conversations around why is this included? Why is this external factor not included? Why is it left out? Maybe you're having conversations around, our customers and their inventory strategies. But what it does is, and what has been so valuable is it isn't, here's the forecast as an input. Now let's also talk about external factors that are going on. You're weaving that into your forecast and into the conversation with another thing that Jason mentioned, with some of the why, and that becomes a part of a more robust, data-driven decision-making process, more seamless. And again, this being an input to the process, what you've done is collapse that down and strengthen the role that the forecast can play in that conversation. Jason, I think you were getting excited to say something, and
No, you're good. I was noticing some questions in the chat. So
okay. Yeah, and I think some of these that you get into it's not just the one thing. It's not necessarily all the things that you thought. And I think what we tried internally and we struggled with is, you may have the 10 or 15 that conventional wisdom in your company says, these are related to this product family, these are related to whatever aspect of our business. How do you understand what else is out there that is reasonable to include and has an explanatory power to that model? That's very difficult. And again, how do you play the game of understanding leads and lags? And then it's a lot of times it's the combination. What folks internally talked about, and it's something that's still maybe a concept and a work in process. If there were the 10 or 15 external factors that drove some aspect of your business, how do you get red light, green light, right? Upward, downward pressure to understand the health of your business, again, to integrate that more into the conversation of decision making and less disconnected from what you're currently doing with business forecasting. I think another valuable conversation that we've had is the forecast isn't the answer. The forecast isn't going to give us a number that's going to tell us the answer and tell us the decision to make. The concept of looking for inflection points, we have some incredibly intelligent business partners, and for them, and in some of these instances, it really is about taking additional data that they have about certain aspects of our business or of the market, and then getting additional intelligence around the inflection point and the timing of those inflection points. A lot of our forecasts move more slowly, trend more slowly, show less acceleration. But when we can get a model showing an inflection point and then coupling that with whether what our customers are saying, our suppliers are saying, or what the market in general is saying, it adds extra weight to decisions we're going to make in that business context. So, Jason, I'm not sure what there resonated, or if you'd like to get some color.
No, I think yeah, no, I appreciate that, Steve. I think what I hear and sort of together is the importance of the confidence in what you're doing and the ability to explain that to the team, and then making sure that you're able to get that get the buy-in, right, from those around you and the decision makers. So that way, as a group, you can confidently take action on what you're seeing, right?
Mhm.
If you do things in like a black box, or you do things with unexplainable mathematical expressions, right? Like that's where things, for me, in my experience, where it breaks down, right? It works really well for folks in like a PhD program writing a paper, but it really doesn't help, businesses, make decisions where, because oftentimes, like, you do have, like, there's still this layer of human intelligence, right, where people actually can bring in their thinking on top of the model output. And so understanding, like you're saying, like understanding like how to articulate what's driving these things, I think is really a critical factor in actually driving business outcomes from these efforts.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think looping back to the first bullet, and this is something we've been continuing to try to grow and expand at Worthington Steel, is the training and education just in general around the read, write, critically consuming, identifying opportunities for the application of data analytics, and in this case, the like forecasting, as folks, as you have those conversations and you share more about the process of going to get external indicators, seeing whether they're impactful, what that means, how they've improved or been integrated into the forecasting process, which ones weren't considered. You're having additional conversations that build the confidence and competence of that group. Again, so then they become more active participants in these activities, identifying additional opportunities to, again, do exactly what we're talking about here. I think that's critical to anything we do. And then the forecast literacy is just drilling down a little bit deeper. And I think what it's done is help us get pull from the business around opportunities. Like, hey, have we thought about doing it here? Now I understand it. Now I'm confident in it. I can explain it, and I can identify opportunities for its further application. And I think, like you mentioned, it doesn't sit separately. I think a lot of times I hear what you're saying, and this happens if we're not effectively understanding the context with which we're delivering any analytic product. But I think a lot of times it could be, well, I know your forecast is saying this, but here's what we're seeing out in the world, out externally, and then it becomes a tension as opposed to when it's integrated, or the degree of integration is at least understood and where you're aligned on it, that tension will fade away and it can work more, whatever, harmoniously to get to the decision you need to make and then to take action more confidently.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a team. The team is required.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Much appreciated. So I have just a couple slides left, and I see there's questions in the chat. We're going to get through those. Thank you guys for posting them in there, and everyone feel free to lob in some more. We should have plenty of time to get through everything. Just a few real quick slides. So Ready Signal, I mean, hopefully it's clear, but we really are like a human in the loop, AI powered economist. That's what we're trying to do. Just help folks kind of do what we spoke about, help make your teams better at this decision-making process. We try to save a lot of time, do the things. I posted up that prompt earlier that does kind of really explain what we do and kind of would help your team power up. So, we've got the data catalog, and we do all the things that we spoke about. Any questions or anything we can do to help you, just let us know. All right. So with that, I do want to get to the Q&A. And also, like, I threw up my little LinkedIn on there too. If anyone wants to hit me up there, like, I'm just seriously a resource. I love talking about this stuff. It's like super fun. And so anytime, hit me up. I know your teams are welcome to hit me up too. So with that, I see a few questions here. So I'm going to start with, so like Nathaniel asked, how are you forecasting the signals, so economic, weather, labor, etc., or pulling those from other forecasts? So yeah, so actually we would, the step in the process here would apply really when anyone's building a forecast. So first step is sort of building that model where you understand the relationships between the things, leads and lags, et cetera. So you have your model framework built. And when it comes time to forecast, you actually have to forecast all the inputs. So it's an excellent question. So we have to look at, actually, there's like a two-stage process here where you're first forecasting the independent variables. So you actually have to get a forecast of economic, if you have labor factors in there, weather, you got to figure out, there's different ways to forecast weather. But so you're actually having to put those alongside of your other internal independent variables. So I'll stick with the marketing example, because that's kind of fresh in my mind. We just talked about it. But so if you have a sales forecast, you're going to have pricing, marketing, you have some distribution data. Those are your internal data that you can largely control. So you're going to put your budget or plan in for those for the forecast period. But then these other external variables, you actually have to build the forecast for each of those. And so you do that step where you actually forecast out. You run the same sort of process and use that as your dependent variable and build your forecast for those. So it becomes a little bit of a multi-step forecast. And you do have to figure out a point to sort of snap the line there. But that's how we do it. We build out these little forecasts, and then you end up with those data sets that feed your forecast. And I think there was actually a question about, it looks like Karthik asked a question that ties to that. So I see another question here too. But Karthik question ties right to that. So determining, wait, there was one about, not Karthik, John asked about scenarios for, kind of like upside, downside and things. And so when you have those forecasts of economic, macroeconomic types of factors, you're going to want to think about if I'm optimistic towards the next, month, quarter, 6 months, or if I'm pessimistic or realistic, that's where you get into those sort of scenario plans where you can kind of then decide at a kind of one step back, how do I view the next, period of time? And then that's going to influence your forecasted out input variables. And as you do that step, then you can see the impact on what that's going to be, let's say, for your sales, right? So if you're more pessimistic, you're going to put in a more pessimistic skew to those macroeconomic indicators, and that's going to drive your sales, or optimistic. And what that then lets you do is, well, if I think it's pessimistic, it's going to be this. If I'm going to be optimistic, it's going to be this. And then you can sit back and say, well, I'm like 50-50, or no, I really think there's going to be a recession, or I really think there's going to be a big boom, and then lets you intentionally decide where you land on that. And then your forecast reflects your opinion of that situation. And when it comes to like upside risk versus downside risk, John, to your question, that they are different, and those relationships are different, because you're going to have, for your business, what the impacts are going to be different. So if there's a 10% downturn in the economy, that could have a very different impact relative to if there's a 10% overperformance, right? And so there's going to be a different impact to the business, but that's what these models are set to do, is help you figure out what those are. And then Karthik asked, different types of forecasting solutions. There's a ton. And so how do you determine which method model is the best? So we tend to, we're seeing a lot, I see a lot of folks using the neural profit model. That seems to be it's a nice framework. It's a relatively easy to get teams heads around. It internally controls for seasonality, which is really important. So the fact that that's just kind of done inside of a neural profit model is really helpful. That said, there's a lot of different systems out there that actually, you can go work with, like a data robot, where they test, tons and tons of models, and it tells you this is the best for you. There's I think AWS SageMaker does something similar. Anaplan has a product. So there's all these sort of auto ML solutions, or what those are called, that could be really helpful. But what we find is we tend to test, neural profit, even just sometimes looking at like stepwise linear regression model, right? So it's really about finding the right model that your team can use and explain. That's important. And there are tons and tons of options in the market today. Thank you guys for those questions, and I'm seeing more come in. So please, we have plenty of time. So Elliot's asking feelings on LLMs, reducing cognitive load, but also possibly critical thinking. LLM prompts homogenize forecasting strategies and how to balance skills versus AI prompts in your own workload. So great question. So I think one of the central themes, is that these you are, and I'll steal again from Jeff's book. He actually talks about this quite a bit. So looking at they're like your thought partner, right? So an LLM is like your thought partner. So they're there to help you think, but you're the one doing the thinking, right? So that reduction in critical thinking comment, I think maybe for some, but for the folks that are really going to excel in sort of like the next 5 to 10 year window, that's where you have powerful creative thinkers leveraging LLMs to be their partner, and then helping the creative thinking part bring things more to life rapidly, right? So for me, as someone who I've spent the last 20 years coding, but very poorly, and I'm not great at it, I just do it all the time. It's really helpful, right? So so my skill set at writing code now is great, but I wasn't ever great at writing code, and that's never been the important part of my thought. It's like, what do I want the code to do, right? Like what am I trying to achieve an outcome there? And so leveraging LLMs and the that's where for me, I think when you use, I will circle back to that sort of the style of prompt with that context, role, interview, task. When you structure a prompt like that, it will actually help you think more. And so what I love about this construct is there's an interview step where ChatGPT will actually ask you some questions that stimulate your thinking, and it helps pull more of your thinking into what it's going to do, right? And so I think when it comes to forecasting, right, and forecasting strategies, that's where the techniques, right? So if you've never produced a model using a neural profit model, you can do that with just a few hours of time, right? Now you could actually achieve something like that, which would be very difficult if you'd never done it before, right? So the actual techniques are going to be much more approachable to a much larger set, but your feelings about, if you look at the last time I saw the markets today were Dow was up 1,000 points, right? Yesterday, if you asked ChatGPT what was going to happen today, I don't know. I doubt it would have called that, right? That's an opinion, right? And so these interactions where we're talking about real world applications and real world forward thinking, I think that's still critically important in the process. I think I've rambled long enough on that. Hit me up if you want to continue that discussion. Let's see. So Hammond asked, when adding stress tests to the forecasting models, what aspects do you consider for a REMA or a profit model? So that's a great question. And I would say I would actually probably defer to my data science team for that. I don't know. Do we have an answer for that handy? I'm putting people on the spot that really don't like being put on the spot. So let me get back to you on that. We'll see if we can get an actual, I don't want to say something overly stupid. Paula's asking, are these external factors easily predictable? Great question. Doesn't forecasting things like trends and weather require specialized expertise? Is it worth investigating or investing in specialized companies that provide projections into these variables? So realistic to handle this internally with a small team. So there's certainly options for both. So from when it comes to forecasting weather. So if you want to look at, if your business is very weather dependent, right? So if you're like, you know, a CPG company that sells more when it's colder, right? Like you're going to want some really good weather, and there's really sophisticated, there's companies that just specialize in like telling you what the weather is going to be like next August, right? And they do a lot of work, highly specialized, like, you know, here's the trend that we're seeing and things like that. Now, if you're making $100 million decisions on these types of data, then yeah, you're probably going to want to put a few bucks into that. Um, if the impacts are smaller, then what I've seen, what we've done is with very small teams, you can actually get really solid forecasts on each of these inputs by using the techniques we described here. Because the goal is, again, setting yourselves up for these are inputs to help guide you in a forecast that's going to help you kind of plan with some scenarios around it. And the reality is, these forecasts are, they're going to be a little subjective no matter who you go to. So you're going to bring their bias into whatever forecast you're doing. And my personal experience and my preference is I kind of want my bias to be in there, and I want to be express about it. Like I think that, you know, the tariffs are going to have this type of impact in 6 months. Like this is how I see the market going. Is it, you know, is it going to be beneficial for job growth? Is unemployment rate going to go down? I want to have my controls over that and control for that expressly. And so when I'm building my forecasts, I want to be able to put my teeth into that. And with the tools today, like having a small team, I don't think should stand in your way. I think a small team, I mean, even if you have like a team, right? Like multiple people doing this, you're actually pretty far ahead. Like a lot of folks don't actually even have teams of people doing this, one or two. It's fractional resources, quite frankly. And so I would suggest um, I would suggest that start with your small team first, give them the tools to do this and encouragement to test it out. And then if needed, there certainly are specialized partners that can do these forecasting. Let's see. So Nathaniel asks, what do you do when you find factors that make sense to impact your business or demand, but when looking through correlations, Granger causality, one of my favorite topics, prediction improvement, it's not panning out. So some recommendations. Okay, so that's a great question. I can't tell you how excited I'm to actually use Granger causality in your question. So number one, when you're separating out like causation versus correlation, there's a few different things here. So we're looking at the macroeconomic world and building a forecast. These things that we're tracking track in relation to our KPI of choice, right? So if we see a spike in unemployment rate, we may see a downturn in sales, and it's not a direct like causal relationship, but that is a leading indicator, let's say, of our variable. And so one of the things when you're talking about the prediction improvement, it's not panning out. So this will be a little bit technical, but when you're doing these forecasts and you're trying to make strong predictions, one of the things is ensuring that you're not facing things like heteroscedasticity. So if you use Granger causality, I feel like I can use that term too. And so oftentimes you're going to want to put models into a little bit of a different format that can tend to reduce like the explanatory power of the model, but actually increase its predictive power. So putting your model in something like a log difference form and making sure that you've got good control for the heteroscedasticity or multicollinearity. So that way, when you're actually making predictions, your predictions will get tighter. So if you're seeing issues with the performance of the model, even though it looks like it should be doing really well, there's some techniques then that you can follow to help, okay, maybe make some trade-offs in the explanatory power versus the predictive power. And so that's one that you can I'd be happy to talk you through some things about that. If you are facing that, I'd be happy just to brainstorm some solutions with you. And then, oh, okay. Sounds like we had an answer. I don't know, what was the answer? We got from the support team. So when factors theoretically make sense, but aren't statistically improving your predictions, so double checking data integrity, ensuring no missing or erroneous data is distorting the results. So you consider time lags, And then important to watch multi-collinearity. So I think that was a different question. Great. All right, let's see. I don't know. I think that is the end of the questions.
We do have a question here from Nathaniel Jason. What do you do when you find factors that make sense to impact your business or demand? Or when looking through correlations? Oh no, I'm sorry, you already got that one. My apologies.
Yeah, no,
Steve, I have a question for you as it relates to, you know, how you are growing and expanding forecast literacy. What programs, resources, tools, you know, trainings have you integrated, you know, for the business around that?
It's more of the foundational data literacy. So we've worked and stood up a data literacy program prior to spinoff that we're now trying to keep moving. And the goal is data literacy, data fluency as a core competency for all personas across the organization. A portion now we haven't driven as focused. We haven't been as focused on the forecast literacy. That has tended to evolve in the conversations we're having with the teams that we're delivering the analytic product to. Like it's not a technical explanation or an answer to Nathaniel's question, but that was the conversations around this is what the forecast currently includes. This is why some of these may not be correlated. It was a bigger business discussion, but as part of that, anytime you deliver a forecast solution, it's, well, this wasn't right. Why is this off? This isn't, and you're talking about your confidence in it and just what it is and what it isn't and how it is an input. And it's similar to what we've tried to do with whether it's BI solutions or other data science solutions, is be more explicit in the conversation of like the life cycle, the inputs, the model and how the model's being produced, what it is, what it isn't, and the outputs and what they are. And then, you know, our job is to understand all the context around it, which is why I think this is such a valuable conversation, because a lot of the context around it are factors outside of your company and even factors outside of your control. And we tend to not look as much in that context as opposed to the context of, well, Jason works in this function. I need to understand how his people do their work and how they make decisions.
Yep. Great. Okay. Okay, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Great content, great presentation. Really appreciate the dialogue. And everybody that fed us their questions, thank you very much. Really rich questions came in. So much appreciated there. We'll be sharing the recording of this webinar and the slides themselves in an upcoming email, and it will also be available on our website. And stay tuned on our email and social channels for other upcoming blogs and webinars, tools and resources, and other content to help design and deliberate a scalable data strategy that drives tangible business value. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for joining, and have a great rest of your day. Onward and upward.
thank you.